back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I want to talk about a topic that I think is really important but isn't talked about very often, and that is sexual content in the books that we read and in general the media that we consume, movies and whatever, but I'm gonna just kind of focus on books today because I'm a book channel. I've been thinking about making a video like this for quite a while, a couple of years probably, but today I actually took the time to sit down and put my thoughts together on it and put together something that I mostly am just gonna read because I don't want to get off on crazy rabbit trails, right? I think that this is one of those topics that people really, especially believers who are kind of new or became believers as, late teens or early adults. I think that this topic of where's the line is one that people really struggle with. And this video is not to sort of tell you what to do. It's just to give you my own perspective and my own thoughts on it, because I think that when we hear the different perspectives from people, from other believers, from older believers, sometimes it can help us sort of solidify our own thoughts and our own, beliefs and our own standards and make decisions for ourselves. It just helps sometimes to hear what other people are doing or thinking about the topic. So that's my intention here, not trying to, preach at you or anything like that. I learned very, very early on, while I was still a teenager, that I wanted to avoid sexual content in books. I wasn't super great at it until I got into my adulthood, but I recognized really early on the damage that it could do. I think that throughout my life, while I haven't had personal struggles, I can see where the personal struggles of people who have been exposed to sexual content through media and entertainment has affected their decisions to the point where it has affected my life, right? People in my life had made decisions that were influenced by the content they were exposed to that has hurt me and has hurt people that I love. And it's just so not worth it. So today I just kind of want to talk about my own standards and how I develop them. And I'd love to hear your respectful comments as well. So, we can continue dialogue down below. All right. So as Christians, we are told to avoid sexual immorality, right? Jesus made it really clear that it's not just in the act of sexual immorality, it's also in the thoughts. And I'm actually honestly really surprised about the things that Christians will allow themselves to write and to read, especially since this is the first time in a really long time in the publishing world where so many clean books are being published regularly. There really are a lot out there now. And I don't think people realize that. In fact, I've heard other Christian booktubers talk about how they didn't realize that there was a genre of Christian fiction or even a genre of clean fiction. Besides classics, personally, I usually avoid most fiction, and it's for that reason. I don't want to encounter something that, I can't remove from my mind once it's there, right? Too many times I have been blindsided by a story that seems clean until suddenly it takes a turn and I am blindsided by something that I did not consent to being exposed to, right, before it was too late. Honestly, it's kind of like a raping of the mind, and we can't just immediately forget those words or those images. The Bible does encourage us to guard our hearts and our minds. And so I personally would like to take as much proactive action as I can, just to be careful about that. So here are some questions that I ask myself when I encounter sexual content in a book. And this kind of helps me know if I should DNF or keep reading. And then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why I think this is all a big deal. So one thing that I ask myself is, am I reading this book for information or for entertainment? So to me, it's one thing to read that, Lord Byron had multiple sexual relationships with both men and women. A few sentences about his real life proclivities will help me to understand this, artist, author, poet, whatever. It will help me to understand the real life choices that he made and get a bigger picture of the kind of person he was. What influenced his writing, what influenced, his choices. Reading about that is information that is going to help me further in my study of him, if I chose to study him. Of course, I don't want to read details, but just reading facts in a biography doesn't bother me. But it would be a completely different thing to read a historical fiction story about him, about these relationships, about these acts actually happening, describing them to one level of detail or another. Writers of fiction take the time to imagine sex scenes in their head. They write them and rewrite them over and over again to get them just perfect, to get the reader to some sort of emotional state. They want to impact the reader one way or another. This kind of writing is purely for entertainment, and to me it's like voyeurism. It's like porn. Like, why are we being entertained by something so intimate? Secondly, I ask myself, what kind of emotions does this stir in me? Well, I don't purposefully read either one. To me, it's one thing to read about like a brutal rape that will make me feel hatred toward the perpetrator, that will make me feel compassion toward the victim, that will set up that victim's story so that I can, understand where she's coming from for the rest of that book. It's another thing to just read about two people that are having a romp, which is none of my business. I'd still try to skip the details in the first story. But that first story, that brutal story, wouldn't make me feel like the author was trying to stomp on something sacred with the purpose of keeping me reading. It would help me instead to understand the brutal, horrific things that this character has been through and then rejoice with her all the more, when things get better or whatever. Another question I ask myself is, would I be okay with my kids doing this? So holding hands, flirting, like publicly acceptable, light kissing, those are things that I allow my older teens to do with the person that they are dating. For me, anything past that between non-married people is not okay. Even if it's behind closed doors, I would definitely DNF if they're not actually married to each other. If my kids were married, like in real life, and they hypothetically came to stay the night with me in my house, they would need to be doing anything past those things I mentioned behind closed doors and quiet enough that no one else in the house could hear them. So if a book sends a married couple, happily or unhappily off to bed, then great. But I don't want to read about anything that happens afterward. It's none of my business. I don't need to be entertained by that. So why is all of this a big deal? Books are meant to give us an experience. Oftentimes an experience that we don't have, right? Like a lot of times that's the point of why we're reading in the first place, for escapism. And that's fine if we're reading about vacations or dream jobs or far off lands or whatever. But when we are reading about something as intimate as sex, it can really mess us up, whether we're married or not. The Bible tells us to flee sexual immorality, right? Joseph, when he was propositioned by Potiphar's wife, he didn't bat an eye. He just ran. He understood the power of temptation and how hanging out in that fantasy world, in the world of romance at least, can cause your real world to come crashing down. The night before I got married, my mom gave me the best advice that I think she ever could, and I think about it all the time. She told me to be careful about my expectations in marriage, to see things for what they really are and not what the fantasy in my mind might expect them to be or want them to be, or be bitter if they're not that way. And that, I think, is the danger of reading about something as sacred as sexual intimacy in such a frivolous way. If we're not married, then we're building up a fantasy in our mind about what this act is actually like. And then we are tempted to either seek it out as an unmarried person, or we are at risk of having unrealistic expectations when we are married. If we are married, then we might start to compare the hero of this story to our own husband. We, read about this perfectly crafted sexual experience in this book, and we don't think about the fact that the author wrote and rewrote from her own imagination. She consulted friends, she consulted resources, she consulted manuals on how to write this, kind of a scene. She consulted other similar stories to get it just right. We don't think about that stuff. We just think, why doesn't my husband act or talk or think like that guy? why doesn't he do that? Why doesn't he say that? And why is my own experience such a fumbling mess sometimes? Again, these are just my own opinions and experiences, but I can tell you that I personally have experienced the effects of people in my life who got so caught up in the fantasy side of these experiences, whether it was through books or movies or TV or social media or whatever, that it caused them to make choices that hurt them. It hurt me. It hurt people that I love. It is a big deal. It's real. It's why we're to flee sexual immorality. It's why we are not to have anything to do with it. It's why we're not to dwell on those things. As readers, we often want knowledge. Books allow us to experience just about anything we could ever want to, right? But as believers, we are encouraged to seek wisdom. Wisdom tells us to keep our minds pure. Pure doesn't mean uneducated. It means untainted. Wisdom tells us to let some things remain sacred. So I hope this blessed and encouraged you guys. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this subject if you want. We all have different perspectives and experiences and levels of tolerance. I just thought that I would share mine here. Hope this was an encouragement to you. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.